A show of hands, please. How many of you were here last year?
To this?
Well, just to the show. Yeah. And how many of you came to the seminar last year that I ran about we need to get more people with money into the industry?
No.
Okay. Just to set this up, last year the seminar was about how the hi-fi industry is the only luxury industry that actually offends the people it should be attracting. It's, as I describe it, it's communists making product for people they despise. And it is the only luxury sector that hasn't grown in the last 20 years. There are now waiting lists for $1,500 pairs of Louboutin shoes. And as much as I know the people in the fashion industry, they're far less useful than even speaker cables, because you can only wear them once, apparently. But in the past year, and this has nothing to do with me being an elitist, as I was accused of last year, I still maintain that for this industry to survive and for the high end to carry on, we've got to get the people who can afford it buying the stuff. But that's less than something like 0.1% of the population. And I don't know what it's going to take to get them, after they've paid for their Bugatti, to buy a piece of good hi-fi. But at the same time, companies that are very high-end have been producing better and better equipment for less and less money. Now, I live outside of the U.S., and as we see the U.S. Vis-a-vis the recovery, and if all of you laugh and throw paper cups at me, I'll understand, but the rest of the world sees the U.S. as being the first country that will pull out of the Depression. Now, current government shutdown aside. The reason why I'm setting it up this way is because I don't want any of the communists among you thinking I'm elitist when I'm asking you to spend $100, because I am aware as anyone that $100 is a fortune to someone on welfare. $5 is a fortune to someone on welfare. What this is addressing is what is called in the UK the squeezed middle classes, because the people that have suffered the most from the downturn are the people that were earning middle incomes. The extreme poverty-stricken people, life carries on in the same miserable level. If you're in Europe, your welfare just went up by a factor of 3. But if you're middle class, like most people, you're feeling the pinch. That doesn't mean you've given up a passion for music. In the past couple of years, the kind of products that have come out, and this show is full of them, have enabled people who still love their hi-fi, but who have had to cut back to get astonishing levels of sound. And the product that triggered this is the Dragonfly from AudioQuest. We also have a product, and the gentleman on the end, Andrew, is the speaker designer. Unfortunately, it's got one of those 1970s-style Japanese names. What is the model number of the speaker you designed, Andrew?
The SP-BS22W.
Okay.
Pioneer.
That is a Pioneer
That's a
loudspeaker.
Pioneer.
That's a Pioneer loudspeaker
Right.
that for a short while Amazon was selling for $89 a pair. And I have been using them on my desk for the last 6 months instead of my high-end stuff, and I haven't noticed any change in my joy levels. But then I'm miserable anyway. Roy has been making dirt cheap equipment for impoverished audiophiles for nearly 30 years. So we have a manufacturer who's always recognized that there has to be an entry level. We have, with Joe from AudioQuest, a cable company of all things that brought out a DAC for people that are broke. And Andrew, who works for TAD, which is part of the Pioneer organization, and Andrew and I worked together on the history of KEF, so Andrew's CV is amazing, brought out this speaker that every single hi-fi reviewer has gone crazy over it. What I'd like to do to start this off, because it's going to be a Q&A, the only thing I would ask is that you don't ask anyone up here what you should buy, because that would cause nothing but trouble. But I would like to start off with Joe explaining how AudioQuest, what brought AudioQuest to the point where they wanted to bring out an astonishing little DAC for very little money.
You know, the concept was born, it's something that two people, William Lowe, who is the owner and chief designer of AudioQuest, and Steve Silberman, both kind of had in their minds for a while. The embodiment of it wasn't the little USB DAC called Dragonfly that people now know, it was going to be a pregnant USB cable. That was what we were thinking. Cable company, so of course we're thinking in terms of cable. We were, in fact, and we had known designer Gordon Rankin, who's a brilliant digital designer, godfather of asynchronous transfer. We'd known him forever, and so we were sitting here at Rocky Mountain having lunch 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe it was 3 years ago. And we were talking about this idea of a pregnant USB cable with a DAC in it. And Gordon at one point said, well, you wouldn't really even need the cable. And Bill and I looked at each other like, wow. And because immediately we could sort of conceive of what the physical embodiment might be. And then it was just a matter of taking a whole nother year to make it really sound good, which took many, many, many iterations. I can tell you the first one stunk to high heaven. I mean, I got it to listen to. Are you kidding me? This is terrible. So there was, but that's how products evolve. But I think to answer you're really asking why did we think there was a need?
Yes.
Okay. Bill has always been fascinated with the idea of bringing people into our world and having gateway products. Any one of us who make very expensive gear, that stuff gets talked about in this world. People want to read about and see the Ferraris. And then if you're a cable manufacturer, my God, you make a $1,000 HDMI cable, the outrage of it, But no one talks about your $30 HDMI cable, which has, some real attributes too. The expensive stuff gets talked about. But I think the idea was to have a gateway product that would allow people that are, I call them civilians, to kind of come into our world in a way that is comfortable and easy to set up. And that's really the genesis of it.
Excellent. Andrew, your product is a slightly different situation because part of the effect after it came out and everyone realized it was amazing, Amazon got hold of it and actually discounted it when they didn't need to, although that did benefit the people to save $30 or $40. What was the thinking behind Pioneer to pull you in from their flagship brand, TAD, to come up with this speaker? What was the actual brief?
To make money rather than losing it with TAD? No, joking. It was actually born from Best Buy. We sell lots of product through Best Buy or electronics, and they were looking to expand their speaker line, but they didn't want to go to another new manufacturer and work with them. So they wanted to work within the existing manufacturers. And they knew that I was doing the TAD loudspeakers. They knew I did the EX speakers, because for a while they chose to put them into MHT. So it's not that Best Buy don't know what's happening in the high end. They just don't sell high-end stuff. So they said, could we design a range of speakers to fill in some of the gaps in their lineup, rather than competing head-to-head with what they've got? So we examined their lineup, found where the gaps could be, and then determined, okay, let's see what we can design. But I didn't want to just design something to meet a price point and everyone go, yeah, it's at that time a $89 speaker. In the back of my head, because of what I do with the TAD stuff, I wanted to surprise people and have them, if they didn't know what the product was capable of, which would be the case when we first launched it, they'd take it by home, maybe by mistake, and go, oh, I didn't expect it to do that. And as word got round, people would buy it because they'd heard what it could do. And for me, it was a way of serving the people, like we're saying, that can't afford, my entry level for TAD is $30,000. That's not real entry price point. Such a deal. But all these people who, like ourselves, you have friends who come and say, oh, I think I want to buy a stereo system, but I don't know what to get. Can you recommend something? And you recommend your base level of what you consider a starter hi-fi. And they go, oh, that much? No, I didn't want to spend that much. Well, this is a way of saying, get this. And you do have a good starter system. And hopefully that will continue on the path to where we are now and my other entry-level speaker. But that's the point. Give a way for people to get into the marketplace and be surprised. And also for the people who have good stereo systems, I've done so many demos where people have come to me afterwards and said, I don't really need those speakers, but I just want to have them because they're such good value. And one guy said, I wish I had a son I could give them to. But he went out, I saw him a couple of weeks later, he said, do you remember me from the Newport Beach show? And I said, yeah. He said, I was talking about getting the speakers. He said, I did actually buy them. They're in a box at home. I just had to have them. So that was the point. It's to surprise people and give a path in. And it was Best Buy who started this off. The way we've been able to get the good pricing is because of the commitment from Best Buy.
Right.
They can, they've got 1,000 stores. Load-in quantity is 2,000 units. Then you're going to sell thousands a month. And with that commitment, you can get real pricing from the factory.
Right.
What normally happens is you make a guess as to how many you can sell. The factory never believes you, so they put up their prices because they know you're going to cut the quantity after 2 months. But this way, it's real.
Thank you, Andrew.
Just curious, does Pioneer make any money out of that speaker?
That's a good question because I did get an online review and they sent me the copy before they published it just to check over. And I said, look, I do have a comment about what you've written. I don't want to influence what you write, but I do want to make a correction. This guy had written, this is a loss leader for Pioneer. It's their way to get back into the market of speakers, because we haven't been known for speakers since the 80s with the HPM series. And I said, I have to correct you on this. I could not have started this project without having done a full analysis of profit and loss. This is full margin for the dealer, as much as they get for every other product they sell. It's full margin for us. It's one of our most profitable products. We've sold millions of dollars worth a year of this one product lineup. And it does make us real money. Because if I'd have started with a loss leader, where do I go from there? When I do the next product up, it can't be any better. If I then, at some point, I've got to start making money, and that next product has to cost more, but if I can't sell it for more because I was doing a loss leader, I've got nowhere to go. So I said that I just took that whole paragraph out of the review.
Yeah. Before I get to Roy, I have to explain another thing that's been a constant in hi-fi for decades, and this is to set up how Roy created his business. When I started out in hi-fi as a teenager, I saved and saved and saved and bought an entry-level system. Only because I didn't know enough about hi-fi to trust myself to use the other avenue that people use when times are tough, which is buying secondhand. And last week in the UK, I was at what is the world's largest audio jumble sale. They do it twice a year. And I walked around there and realized that for under $200, I could have picked up an as-new Thorens 150 turntable with arm and cartridge, plus an NAD amplifier, plus a pair of IMF loudspeakers, which would have sounded astounding. But I also looked around, and everyone in that building was interchangeable with you guys, aside from the 1, 2, 3 women in the room, all above a certain age, all seasoned audiophiles, all who would know how to take apart a turntable and rebuild it, all of whom would know how to use an AV meter or a tube tester and get this stuff working. So when we get to the Q&A, I don't want any of you to think that we've neglected that avenue, because it is a very real avenue for when times are tough. Just like I buy a secondhand car before I buy a new one. But the point is that the industry has changed so much for a number of reasons. It's a perfect storm. I mean, digital, whether you like it or hate it, has enabled a lot of people to get incredible performance for very little money. With Roy, what interests me is that Roy started out at the time where hi-fi was still at its astonishing peak. It was still aspirational. So what I would ask Roy is, when you started Music Hall, did you start with entry-level equipment or did you gravitate towards it? Because you came from a high-end background, Roy.
I started out of complete ignorance. If I'd known then what I know now, you know. My first product, I worked for Lynn Products. Lynn, I grew up with Ivor Tiefenbrunn of Lynn in Scotland, and when I moved to America, he asked that I help him start a factory making his products in America, which I resisted for many years, but finally, after I'd been fired from every major department store in New York, I needed a job, I called up Ivor. And so I started building Lynn speakers. We did it for 4 years, but we didn't make money at it. And so we imported, this was in 1985, we imported the revolver turntable, just as everyone was throwing out their turntables and buying CD players. So I went out with complete ignorance and tried selling a turntable, which was kind of a good turntable if the speed worked. And no one was buying it, you know. It was a very, very hard time. But I started off with entry level, and then I got involved with Creek, which is also, Mike Creek had started in the early 80s building very, very affordable amplifiers in England, and he went from out his garage to building thousands of units a year and doing incredibly well. And he was really probably one of the first people to come up with really, really good quality entry level. So my background is what I call cheap and cheerful, and I've just continued that all the way, and because it's something to do with the fact that I can't say to someone, and it only costs $10,000. You know, I laugh like some of you laugh, you know, because it's ridiculous to me. I mean, I see some of the prices here. We're showing upstairs. We have a pair of $1,000 speakers, and the guys across the way have got a pair of $80,000 speakers. And I asked him, I said, how many of you sold? He said, none. We've sold a lot at $1,000. We also sell speakers starting at $450. We don't have, you know, $100 speakers. So my whole thrust and everything I do is started from, let's see how inexpensively we could make it. So we have a range of turntables that all come with cartridges. They retail, the first one starts at $250, goes up, yes, it goes up to $4,500. And boy, I have trouble telling people the price, even though I think it's actually worth the money. But so I prefer to be in that price range. I find it easier. The downside of it is sourcing these products, is finding someone who can manufacture products within a very constrained budget. And so a lot of my time is spent sort of what will we build next, and then who will build it, and how can we build it to go within the budget, because we usually what we do is we start off with a suggested retail price. We want to build a product for this particular price point. Then we back engineer it, who can do it. And so far we've been pretty successful. I mean, we do make electronics in China. You can't make cheap electronics anywhere else, as far as I can see. So you have to deal with Chinese manufacturing, which is challenging, as they say. But we make turntables in the Pro-Ject factory in the Czech Republic, and they are a very efficient factory that have been making turntables since there were turntables, and under the communist regime, under the real communist regime. Not you. There's no communists in this room, I'll tell you.
Don't get me started.
I know. Ken and I have crossed swords before.
Sickles, you mean?
Really?
Touche.
Ken, really?
Very good. Very good.
Sorry.
We, under the communist system, in the 80s, when everyone was moving CD players, that wasn't happening in the Eastern European. They were just making turntables, and I got involved shortly after. Heinz, who owns Pro-Ject, Heinz Lichtenegger, who owns Pro-Ject, he found about this company in the Czech Republic started building Pro-Ject turntables, which I don't like because they're competitors, but I do like because they're good. I met him at a party and we started talking. He said, "How would you like a turntable?" I said, "I'd love a turntable. My first product was a turntable." And we started talking and joking and drinking, and eventually he made a turntable from me. We did very well. So I went there and I became a turntable designer. And we have a whole range of turntables, and it's great. And right now, turntable business, as probably most of you know, it is booming. I mean, we have never sold so many. I mean, we sell thousands of turntables a year. I mean, I'm a little company, and people are buying thousands of turntables from me. It's very gratifying. And also, it's very musical. I mean, I heard some amazing digital stuff this morning, and it had been transferred from vinyl. And it was really, really good. But then at one point, we put on our cheapest turntable and played the same recording that was on the vinyl, and it just didn't do it. It didn't do it. Now, of course, I'm biased, but it is. I do find it amusing that a system that was designed over 100 or something years ago, by Edison, still sounds better than some of the most amazing digital gear. I mean, there's some good stuff out there, but it still doesn't turn me on.
Now, Roy mentioned Heinz at Pro-Ject, and I had an interesting conversation with him a couple of weeks ago because at Munich, he launched one of the most incredible bargain products, along with the caliber of your speakers, Andrew. He came out with a turntable called the Elemental. And the Elemental sells for something like $250 or $300 with arm and cartridge. And it even looks cool. And the way he came to this point was, he found out how many junk turntables were being sold by the likes of Amazon. Brands that, we're all audio people, brands we've never heard of. And they've got more plastic in it than a Revell model car kit. So his attitude was, if these newcomers buy this garbage, it's going to put them off progressing. They buy Andrew's speaker, they're going to go to the next phase. They buy a Dragonfly, they may go to the next phase. At the very least, they're going to be happy with what they bought. And he told me, interestingly, last week, if he sees any of his agents, the hi-fi retailers selling it, he will fire them. He said he only wants to go to the people that have no idea about what's out there, not educated audiophiles or aspiring audiophiles. He wants to capture people away from the ones buying the plastic junk. Roy also mentioned China. Now, the first time I went to China...
Just before you go to China, I just want to tell you the backstory to this Elemental. I got pissed off with the $80, $100 ion turntable about 3 years ago. I got really pissed off because it was such junk, and I thought people are playing the vinyl for the last time. And so I went out and I found a turntable in China that I got modified to my specs, which is our entry-level USB turntable. It sells for $250. Reckoning quite correctly that people will pay a bit more for a better turntable. And I told Heinz this.
Oh, okay. I didn't tell him that.
About a year and a half ago, and he said, "Oh, who's making it?" And I told him. So that's okay. That's just the backstory to Heinz.
Well,
but it is a good product.
Yeah, I mean,
I hope they don't sell it here because I don't need to.
The other thing that we have to that needs to be pointed out, and this is no reflection on the dealers so much as the customers. Heinz said, absolutely deadpan, he got sick and tired of replacing counterweights and head shells from people that couldn't set up a turntable. This thing, the Elemental, literally, you just have to plug in the phono plugs, and it's actually balanced and locked at the factory, because he got fed up with replacing counterweights and overhang stuff. Now, the C word, China, is still, people are still attacking. I can't even count the number of rooms I went around here who said proudly not made in China. Well, there's always two sides to everything, and it took me years to realize that the world isn't quite so black and white as I wish it was. But for every manufacturer who's having a hard time competing with the Chinese, there are millions of impoverished music lovers who are benefiting from it. And as much as I would like to see Detroit come back on form as much as I would like to see the UK get away from servicing industry and back to manufacturing. The world has changed, and high-end audio has changed because now we have companies that 5 years ago wouldn't even talk digital are offering streamers. So there is an evolution beyond just the merely economic. Now, there's a question I want to ask all three, and I can probably answer. Could probably answer it, and the answer would be everyone. But I'd like to ask the three of you, what is the profile of the customer for the products we've highlighted? The pioneer speaker, Andrew, who's buying it?
Well, originally, I just assumed it's people walking in to Best Buy and looking at the models and choosing on price, especially when it was going to be slotted in at price points that they didn't currently have, between, say, Eclipse and a Polk. But now it's people specifically going to buy it, either from Amazon or Best Buy or Newegg or whatever.
And would you call them audiophiles? Is that how they found out about it, through audio
They
channels?
find out through the forums. We don't advertise.
Okay.
So, yes, the reviews go to the audiophiles, but the forums deal not just with experienced audiophile buyers. It's general people coming to the forums for advice. And they're getting advice from everybody else on the forums. I'm looking for a speaker or a starter amplifier or whatever. What would you advise I get? And then the forum members, and the more people write about a particular product, the more confidence you have in, I'll get that. And so, mostly it's an informed buyer, but not informed necessarily through the traditional route.
Would you say the same, Joe, for the Dragonfly? Is it a similar experience? Because you hadn't said quite who it was targeted at when you came up with it, who you anticipated would have been the customer.
Well, first, just one thing on China. I do want to say Dragonfly is made at a little factory near Cincinnati. It's not made in China.
That's
I should correct. The outer case is made in Asia, but the actual product is made near Cincinnati.
Sure.
So, initially, it was funny in the marketing of Dragonfly. Initially, we got it to all of this world. All the magazines, all the people we know, all of our contacts, and you all maybe got sick of seeing it. I don't know. It was everywhere. What started to happen around about January this year was we started to see it in publications that none of us had serviced. Rolling Stone. We were all asking, did you send it? No. Did you send it? Popular Mechanics, Men's Health. It's something.
It's where you belong.
Something. Boy, at this age, you're absolutely right. Sky Mall. That is a pay-to-play situation, but what I'm getting at is some sort of tipping point appeared to happen, and then we would ask these people, where'd you get it? How'd you hear about it? What was very interesting is that a lot of them said they had read about it in the hi-fi magazines, and who knew that anyone at
Still
Men's Health, well, okay, a little bit. Well, but that's preaching to the choir. I mean, this is absolute sound you have there. But when you start getting into these other, and then all of these online things that we had nothing to do with, and
Somebody puts in their little search with those stupid smart searches now, then you get bombarded with that. You know how if you're just put in
that's
Google
great to
search,
hear.
and then I'm on eBay, and it's coming up in an advertisement.
Yeah.
And they're doing that with everything,
But
It's interesting.
to answer your question, really about who's it targeted to, it's sure it's great to have, because we all know people, and I myself, I like having it when I travel, but my mother has one, and she's 80, 85 years old, and she knows how to use it, and she loves it.
Did you make her buy it?
I think I gave her a great deal. It's funny within our company. You know, I always lose track of how many people we've got there, but 90 some, I think, total. It's the first product we've ever made in what is now 32 or 33 years that every single person in the company wanted. You know, we have people there that could care less about wire. They're doing a function, you know, and we have people who totally care about wire. But it's the first product that everybody wanted. So I think the reason is it's one of those gateway products, really for everybody. That sounds hypey, doesn't it?
Like
Sorry.
marijuana?
Now,
Very much, yeah.
Now, the way I see your company, Roy, it's very audiophile oriented because your products are unashamedly hi-fi.
Mhm.
They're not slickly presented like a lifestyle thing. And your company is a smaller company than, say, Pioneer, of course.
Maybe not.
Yeah, well, maybe one day, maybe one day. The cross-section of people buying your product, how would you define them?
Just before I answer that, let me just make a point about China, because I would like to make stuff in the States. It's difficult making stuff in China, but let's talk about this Pioneer. What's the retail of that Pioneer speaker? 129. Now, I'm not going to give you the numbers because I can back engineer as to what you're paying for it and what it's costing to manufacture, because it's what I do for a living. But think about it. It was selling on Amazon for $90.
No, the way they work, both Best Buy and Amazon, they sell it at normal retail, then built into the cost structure is an allowance that
For
periodically
discount,
you
fine.
can discount.
Fine. So nevertheless, they're selling it for somewhere between 90 and 120 bucks. They're making some money. You're making money. The manufacturer's making money. So if you go back down the line, where else in the world can you build stuff of that quality at that price? Now, the Ion turntable, which I hate, I happen to know the wholesale price of the Ion because I've been offered it. It's $14.50 per turntable if you buy, I think it's 5 40-foot containers of them, which is a shitload of turntables. A shitload of shit, I should say. So, you know, but the fact is that Ion, as bad as it is, you can actually put a record on and get music out of it. So there's nowhere in the world that can do it. There's nowhere that has the infrastructure. I go to China quite regularly, and China has a big problem, China, because their prices are going up, and they will price themselves out of the market between labor costs and between the value of the RMB going up. Eventually, we won't be buying for China, but there's nowhere else to go because no other country in the world has a massive infrastructure of little factories all over the place, polluting like crazy, but they're making little bits and pieces that get added on to other bits and pieces. And that's how it works in China. And it's a massive organization, and it's an amazing place. And from a manufacturing point of view, you can get, I mean, we sell amplifiers, 550 for a 50-watt amplifier. It's a beautiful engineered piece of equipment, and I'm making money, and the manufacturer's making money, the dealer's making money on it, and you're getting great value for $550. You can't do that in America. Maybe, you know, you in Cincinnati, you said the case is coming from Asia. They'll probably do it because they do great metalwork in China, probably, and so they'll churn it out cheaply and easily at very, very high quality finish. It's a difficult thing. Yes. 3D printing, I think, will revolutionize pretty much everything in the world. I don't know if it'll pose a threat to, there's all sorts of different things they're using. I know a little bit about it. They are beginning to use metals. I think 3D printing's advantage is that it can do unusual shapes that normally, if you have to tool up to do a very complex shape, it's very, very expensive. Every time you open a tool, depends how sophisticated a shape you want to make. But if you use 3D printing, you can actually make one, and it can copy it and do a pretty good replica of it. So I think there'll be terrific advantages. Whether it will affect what we do, I don't know. I think the price of 3D printers will drop. The consumers will buy them, and then you'll go and you'll be able to buy all sorts of materials could be plastics, could be metals. I mean, they're using 3D printers now to make human parts.
Yeah.
They're actually making someone made a larynx. Someone had cancer of the larynx,
And
they
skull
cut it out,
replacement.
and they made a complete larynx. That, and also because it was made out of some sort of plastic material, the body does not reject it.
I think
And
with
so
3D.
there's
sorry.
amazing things happening with 3D printers, and I'm sure it will trickle down into our industry at some point.
And-
I think you'll.
3D tone arm right now.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, VPI has a 3D
That's what I
toner.
have.
Is it?
I think
Yeah,
the first
that's
roll
an
of 3D
amazing piece. I've seen it. It's really
Yeah.
good.
The first role of 3D printing is going to be small-scale manufacturing for people who can't invest in the tooling, or it's not appropriate to tool because you don't have enough quantity of parts. You still need finishing operations, so it's not print and you're done. Especially if you want it good enough resolution to minimize the amount of finishing you do. But it will continue to get better and cheaper. I don't know that it's going to replace traditional tooling of large volume manufacturing for a long.
Actually, there's something I'd like to add on that before, because
sure.
you still have your answer to give, Roy.
Okay,
But
remember
the
the
3D,
question.
yeah, the 3D printing. The first time I saw it was about maybe 5 years ago. I went to a watch factory, major brand, and they were overjoyed with it because they were able for relatively. I mean, 3D printers 5 years ago cost prohibitively. Now they're about $1,500. But what they were able to do is they were able to make, say, a watch case without just from the drawing, hit a button, out came in this blue sort of resin. They were then able to give that to their tool makers, and they said that alone saved them more than the price of the printer, just for one model. But the other thing I'd like to add, and this doesn't, it's peripheral to what we're talking about, which is cost effectiveness. There's something that we should never forget, and this is what has kept the American manufacturers and the European manufacturers alive, is that once you go above a certain price point, there's a perceived value in quality. For example, if you take anything made out of metal, people have a different attitude towards steel, gold, titanium, whatever, and they don't realize that gold should actually cost less than steel because it's harder to work steel than gold. Many years ago, I mean, Andrew, do you know when did spark erosion enter manufacturing for cutting metal? It's got to be 80 years, 100 years? It's a century ago. A friend of mine is a master watchmaker, and you can give him two identical pieces, and he'll tell you which one is spark erosion and which one is handmade. And it's not because the handmade one has oddities to it. It's because it's actually finished in a better way. What spark erosion gave is a infinitely repetitive perfection of part to part to part, which eliminated wastage. I don't know what the percentages are on, say, the number of enclosures you would get for that speaker. How many don't meet spec? Those costs have to be absorbed. So the 3D thing, I think, for the time being, aside from really extreme stuff like human parts, on the manufacturing side, will be to save a fortune in prototyping and to make the inexpensive bits. Now, Roy, you were going to do about the profile of your typical customer, the affordable stuff.
Well, I think it really is. I don't know if it's the audiophile per se. It is some audiophile. It's just people who are looking, who would like to be buy good sounding products, but can't afford or don't want to spend the money on the expensive gear. So right now we have, especially with turntables, we have a large percentage of people buying, older people, meaning 40 plus people, buying turntables, and a ton of kids buying turntables. Kids have discovered vinyl. It's interesting in America. Kids in Europe discovered vinyl, rediscovered vinyl 10, 15 years ago. I mean, I remember I was at a hi-fi show in London. Probably you were there.
Yeah.
And I was actually on the subway going there. There were kids, I mean, teenage kids, who just gone to a record store. And I hadn't seen that since I was a kid. And then it finally came to America, and it's kind of cool just now to have records. And the record companies love us because you can't copy a record. You see, you have to understand something about.
3D printing?
You know that someone's done it with 3D
Someone has,
print,
yeah,
but very,
that's
very
right.
poor quality.
How did it sound,
Yeah,
Roy?
terrible,
It's
terrible,
Yeah.
horrible. It's worse than MP3. But the thing about it is, the record companies we're in the music business, we're that. They were never in that business. They were in the business of selling you pieces of plastic for $6.99, $12.99. And when CDs came around and people could copy them, they went out of business pretty much. They went crazy because they were ripped off, literally ripped off, and they're still being ripped off out there. And then vinyls come back, and they love it because no one can copy a record. No one's going to. You can make a digital copy. If you want a record, you got to go out and buy it. So I don't know why these big record companies haven't come to me and kissed me.
Actually, it was one of my colleagues bought one of the Elemental turntables for his 13-year-old nephew, and his nephew had never handled an LP before, and he put the record down, and the first thing he said was, "How do you access the tracks?" Now, yes, sir.
I'd just like to make 2 points, if I may. The first thing is, the word with manufacturing in China is that sometime mid-2015, cost to manufacture there would equal cost to manufacture here.
Possible, yeah.
Right. The second thing is just a quick little story about people buying and not buying audio equipment. A little while ago, a friend of mine came to me and says he's got a friend in the factory he works with, wants to buy an inexpensive turntable. Do I have any information? So I gave him, I think it was an Acoustic Sounds catalog. I said, don't show him the expensive stuff, right? He just gives him the catalog. 2 days later, comes back. I'm not buying anything because look at all this expensive stuff. The cheap stuff is obviously junk, and I don't want to get involved in this at all.
But that's basic consumer psychology. That's an issue that I think deals with everything. One of the first examples I was given of that was 2 cars at the same price. BMW, a fully loaded 3 Series or a stripped 5 Series. Now, that doesn't apply now because every car comes loaded. But at the time when it was option lists, because that option list seems to be a thing of the past. Everything's got aircon or whatever. And there was a car, it was like, at the time, it was like $27,000, to show you how long ago it was. And you had a 3 Series with everything, the metallic paint, alloy wheels, climate control, or the entry-level 5 Series. And the car nuts would say, well, the 5 Series is a better car, so I'd rather have that. And the normal people would say, well, I want all this stuff. So what you said is absolutely true about the catalog. But that's where your friend should have gone back to you and said, I'm overwhelmed, do the filtering for me.
It wasn't him, it was a friend.
Or he should have told his friend, yeah. Because that happens all the time. I mean, in the other fields I work in, it's the same thing. Every single brand, the days when you had a company like Quad, which had 1 amplifier, 1 preamplifier, and 1 loudspeaker, are long gone. And that was genius in the day because you either had the money or you didn't. You weren't distracted by options. Now you open up any catalog. I don't care if it's Toomey luggage or a wristwatch catalog. There's so much there, and human nature is, oh, well, if I just had a little bit more, I'd get the better model. But that's been commerce ever since manufacturing. Any specific questions for... Yes, sir.
In my talk that I gave yesterday afternoon, I plugged this particular seminar.
Thank you.
Several times. I see some familiar faces in here. I hope there are. So that I don't offend anyone, I have a product from each one of your companies, at least one. I have an old MMF7 that I've had for 11 years. We've totally enjoyed it. I have AudioQuest cables, and your speakers are incredible. I am honored to meet you, and thank you for doing that. In my seminar yesterday, can you design an entry-level system that's affordable? So what I did is went back to 1968 and read somewhere that the average hi-fi system then cost about $225 in 1968 dollars. I found I binged dollar multipliers, found that translates into about $1,523.90 in 2013 dollars. For $1,523.90, can I build a truly emotionally engaging audiophile system? Answer, yes. I put 2 of them up on my presentation. I just put together. One included an AudioQuest Dragonfly for those that want to stream. I used your loudspeakers. You are absolutely right. The first one had the SFBS22s, which I have a pair of, which are everybody that hears. I use them for DJing in small rooms and stuff. Everybody that hears them says, "What?" And then when I tell them the price, they're like, "Where can I get some?" These are non-audio. I'm buying a pair of those, just like you said. But the real stars are the Four standards, the FS52.
What is the retail on those?
$300 on Amazon, the pair.
Yeah.
I put those in a client's family room about 2 months ago, and first off, I was blown away. When he came home, he called me the next day twice and said, I cannot believe what I'm hearing for the price of these loudspeakers. He said, this is just incredible. Called him twice in one day to thank me for putting those in his room. Those are the real stuff.
You know, I think Andrew hit on something that you're getting to earlier, which goes right to the heart of what you said, which is first value, and even more importantly, value has to be part of it. But the other, you said surprise.
Yes.
And that's key, you know, that, wow, I didn't get ripped off. This is awesome. You know, and that's a key part of the equation. And yeah, we have, I mean, not just us, but there are products that deliver the wow, and man, am I glad I did this. And they're not very expensive. I mean, $1,000 is a lot of dough, but you can put together a rocking system, and for not a hell of a lot of money.
Andrew?
Well, Ken touched on this, this poisoning of people against high-end audio, that how could you possibly pay these prices? It must be a rip-off. And so that set people against the idea of spending any amount of money on hi-fi. So at least at entry point, we don't want them immediately poisoned. We want them to be surprised and get good value. And yet, high-end hi-fi isn't a rip-off. When you look at low-volume manufacturing of isolated manufacturing facilities, it really does cost most times that much to manufacture. But an expensive car, you go, I could buy a car for that. Yes, but half of the parts in it are sourced from selling hundreds of thousands of other cars, and you're going to sell a load more expensive cars than you are hi-fi. A Bugatti costs in excess of $1.5 million because...
And they lose $3 million on each.
Right, because it is real engineering that's gone into it that's not
No,
supported by
seriously,
anything
they do
else.
lose that amount. I've been to the factory, and it's strictly...
Yeah.
Gluttons for punishment out there. Everybody's selling big-time products and not making money.
No, you've got to understand the notion of what the flagship product is. It brings the other people in. Because, you see, one of the problems I've always had with my colleagues in the audio press is they never tend to look outside like what these guys know. For example, you guys know immediately how much it's going to cost to ship a 7-pound box. No one ever talks about this stuff during reviews. Now, I have been to probably the most advanced factories in the world for cars, watches, and a few other things. The reason why this industry isn't that sophisticated, there isn't any company in this industry besides Bose and Sony and those level who can even afford to build a small watch factory. Just the bill they get for the Leica microscopes would horrify anyone in this building. Now, the things that you have to consider when we're talking about value for money. Gentleman before mentioned about the price. Sorry, sir, you're actually part of the trade.
Yes.
Sorry, your name, sir?
My name is John Klintz. This is my avocation, but I actually do it. My wife and I run a custom installation business.
Okay, well, you mentioned the value of a system. The first system I bought in my life, Portland, Maine, 1968, took me 3 years to pay off, was $749.
You were about 3 times the average.
And I was, every penny I get, I was about 14, 15, and I had a paper route, and everything went into it. Now, if you go to one of the websites that helps you to calculate, and this is very important because I write a lot about vintage hi-fi. When people used to call Macintosh and Quad and Fisher dentists' systems or lawyers' systems, when you look at the price, the biggest bargain to come along and revolutionize this industry was the AR turntable at $68. $68 in today's money is probably $1,000. Now, this happens with everything, whether you're talking cars, bottle of wine, or a cigar. You have to include that element in. If some old fart like me starts whining about how cheap stuff used to be, maybe when you talk in those dollars, but when you do the calculation, and it's quite complex, because the graphs that do it for you, they will take in average earnings, disposable income, value of the dollar on the global market, the value of gold, gross national product. It's not just a case of doing it times 2. And every time I write about a vintage piece of gear, because I work for a magazine in the UK that reviews a piece of vintage gear to see how it is by today's standards, I'll tell you right now, if you owned quad in the UK in 1957, you were probably a member of Parliament. This is serious. And if you had Macintosh here in 1958, you were at least a dentist. Now, the other thing that Andrew touched on, the high end, obviously in every single field, there are items that are not worth the money they're asking for. And I don't want to even get on the two products that cause the most trouble with credibility in our industry are moving coil cartridges and cables. And I've been to manufacturers of both that actually make them, and manufacturers that just badge engineer someone else's. I've actually been to the factory in Japan that's probably making 80% of the high-end moving coils, and they just changed the body. It's still a great cartridge, but everyone's adding in a margin. Now, if you can, I do most of my work is outside of audio. It's luxury sector. I can tell you why Groibel Forsey charges $350,000 for their cheapest wristwatch. Believe me, they'd like to sell it for less. They only make 100 a year, but they've got a waiting list for 5 years. You do the maths. 100 watches at $300,000 a year is pretty good business. The flip side of that, which has ruined this industry, is you get a crackpot making a $100,000 loudspeaker. He's got no employees. He only has to sell one a year, find one fool to have an income, whereas companies like TAD or AudioQuest, which have huge investment, pension plans, medical, R&D, they have a speaker for a fifth of the price, let's say, and what they've costed into it is stuff that the guy in the garage doesn't have to worry about. And that has always plagued, well, I think this, before regulations, there used to be kit cars. I mean, if you look at cars in the 50s.
I built one.
Which one? Marcus, yeah. This car had a wooden chassis to tell you how British it was. Wooden chassis and a fiberglass body. I can imagine you in that. Well, you see, safety regs have prevented, I can't remember the last time I had a piece of hi-fi actually break. I really can't. But I will say that the first time I went to China was before it actually opened up. It was about 1995. And you would get a tube amp for like $400. The tubes would have cost these guys more than $400 just to buy the tubes. But you run your finger along the faceplate and you would draw blood. Everything was misspelled. The transformers were at different angles. The Chinese trajectory of going from junk to quality has been like lightning. And these gentlemen would not use Chinese manufacture to any, even if it's just a part like the case on the Dragonfly, if it would harm their reputation. You see, I believe in the free market, and it's not the Chinese's fault that Detroit lost the car business. I hate to say that, but we have to stop blaming other people for our own failings. The British sold the family silver. There's nothing left. There isn't a single British power company left. I buy gas and electrics from the French. Jesus. Sorry, questions?
But the national grid is here in New York. It is in New York.
Yeah.
So I guess it goes round and round.
We've only got a couple minutes left. Yes, sir.
Where can I hear these speakers that everybody's talking about?
There's a.
Well, Best Buy won't want me to say this, but you go in, buy them. If you don't like them, you just take them back.
But Andrew, there's
But-
someone here. I've seen him here. There's a couple of rooms.
Is it?
Yeah, I saw him in a couple of rooms.
Oh.
I don't know. My Alzheimer's is kicking in.
But basically,
no,
yeah,
it
you
was
just
someone
walk
else.
into the closest Best Buy and they'll have them in stock.
Amazon.
Oh, Amazon
I
is
could
terrific.
virtually guarantee if you're even remotely into music, you will love them. You'll keep them. You'll give them.
It's one of the very few sure things that you can buy.
Those cheap speakers, an incredible review. These are absolutely.
Yeah.
Not cheap, inexpensive.
High value. Yeah, bookshelf.
Any other questions before we vacate for the next seminar? Yes, sir.
A lot of the manufacturing in China is U.S. or other place designed products,
Okay.
or maybe even parts that they're doing the assembly. Is that what?
It's important to get the perspective of what Chinese manufacturing is like. We go there clearly for cost, but you've always got a balance between cost and quality. And where people have got into problems in manufacturing in China in the past is that if there's a conflict in the factory between meeting your cost object and meeting your quality object, they will always meet the cost object, and they'll change anything without even telling you in order to meet your cost objective. because you can't have two conflicting requirements. So what you have to do is you have to know how things are manufactured in China. You have to have your own if it's a subcontract factory rather than your own factory. So Pioneer owns both. It has its own factories in China, and we also do subcontract. Your own factory is staffed by your own people. Your subcontract factories, you hire somebody to be in there as your representative to control every aspect of that manufacturing. And when you're selecting the factories, we send out personnel from Japan, from our QC department, and they go and they qualify the capability of the factories, and then they sit there while we're doing engineering test production, manufacturing, to do all the QCing, and then you,
And
on
the-
an
and the-
ongoing basis, you'll check that.
And the result was
quality.
a speaker with an unbelievable performance and an incredible price. I will say, as a last note, one of the companies that really established the Chinese sourcing as a potential to give you Western quality was a company called Prima Luna from Holland. And I've known Herman for years, and he's an extreme high-end distributor. And this guy was responsible for Kaseki cartridges. And what he did, his partner actually went to university and is now fluent in Chinese, and said the only way you have an amicable, successful relationship in China is you either own the factory or you have someone there who can communicate exactly what needs to be done. And as I say, I'm into a free market. I would rather see Detroit making more cars than Beijing. But we are in 2013. This is not 1983. And getting back to the point of this seminar, what it has done is it has enabled all of us, you probably all have very good systems, but if an 18-year-old comes up to you and says, look, I want my first hi-fi, you can now sell them something new instead of the risk of secondhand or vintage, and they'll love you for it. Thank you very much.